afternoon. I'm Gerald White. The tradition that we're going to talk about is apple butter. Now, apple butter isn't really a butter. It is a spread, probably on biscuits when it's first used, but it is more like a jam, and it is made out of straight apple. There's nothing in it till the very last step. My grandmother told me when I was a younger boy that she watched her grandmother helping with this procedure back about 1900, I'm guessing. I don't have exact date on that. And at that time, there was fall apples always, and fall apples includes falling fall apples, because what they did was they would eat as many of the apples as they fell and as they could consume. The ones that were not damaged, that were holes or any bruises, they would wrap in probably a newspaper of some kind and put that in the earthen cellar. The rest of the apples, they have apple pie and all kinds of things, but they also wanted to preserve some for over winter. They would actually do this all by hand with the apples that were not good to eat and not ready to store and too many to eat at once. They would take these apples, skin them, core them, take what was left, and put them over a fire and change that into applesauce. In the olden times, they just continue cooking that applesauce overnight into the next morning. We get the applesauce done the day before, and then we bring it out the next morning and start at about 5 in the morning. We have small pieces of wood under a fire. We add one of our ingredients that came from the tradition was providing all of the family members with a silver dollar. The silver dollar is dropped into the applesauce when it's on the kettle. The stir is made out of wood and gets soft in the apple butter, and the silver dollars that we used actually help scrape and keep it from sticking to the bottom. That's stated tradition, and how I got tied up with it was in 1950 about. My grandmother, who talks about told me the story then about her grandmother, is that she decided in the fall she would have a birthday party for my generation, my cousins, and she would cook apple butter in the yard, a small amount, and then put silver dollars in it for each grandchild's birthday that had a birthday in the year. Associated with the tradition are two of the main instruments. One of them is the kettle, the apple butter kettle. And one of the things I want to point out, it is not exactly copper. If you look carefully, you can see the rivets are copper, but the rest of it is brass. And so this is the kettle that existed for my grandmother's grandmother. And this is the kettle that they were using over 120 years ago to cook down the apple butter to preserve for food, because they really needed the food stored in the earthen cellar along with the other things they canned to make it over the winter. After you get it onto the fire, you would be using the apple butter pedal. And the head has holes in it. As you can see, holes in it, and the unique thing about this one is we've been using it since 1976 every year, and we have actually worn the bottom of the wood off so that the bottomless two holes are actually exposed. My son and I discussed whether we should cut that off this year, and he said no, let's just leave it. It takes about 100 pounds of apples for us to fix up 11 gallons of applesauce in the house. We do that the day before usually, and then come out in the morning early to do the rest of the cooking outside. You see now we're down in an area where we do the cooking of the apple butter. We bring the apple butter kettle empty and place it in the rack. The rack was made in about 1950 for the birthday parties, and so the rack isn't as old as the kettle. Once we get the fire going underneath, and if you notice, I put back some of the bricks around the fire area. That tends to reflect the heat and hold it back. It cuts down on the wind blowing and causing smoke for the people close to the kettle. And it also, the bricks get warmed up, and that helps actually radiate some heat back. Once we get the fire going, and somebody needs to stand here and stir continuously. And as they're stirring that, they will bump and tell when they bump the silver dollar, and they will try to set the wooden paddle on that silver dollar and use it to kind of drag across the bottom if there's anything that it's going to stick. They don't want it to stick because it will scorch. The only ingredients we ever put in is ground cinnamon and sugar, and that is done after we've taken it off the fire. We don't put any sugar in it because that would cause it to stick, and we add that to taste. And so when we started inviting people, after 1978 was the first time we had a full contingent here, we had them stand around in a circle and they would help taste. And give them a little taste and see, does it have enough sugar? Is it sweet enough? Can you still taste apple? And after we got that pretty well settled, that the majority felt like, yeah, that's enough sugar, then we start putting the cinnamon in. And so you put these ingredients on top of the applesauce, and then somebody would continue to stir and work it into the applesauce. And pretty soon the applesauce would start looking like chili and darker with these. And so those were the two ingredients. So that tradition hasn't changed. In the old times, they actually put the completed apple butter into crocks like this. And they would put some kind of a oilcloth or something over the top and put it in the earthen cellar, so they'd have 50-some degrees. It's not refrigeration, but it did preserve it. And the reason for cooking all day long, like we do, is to dry the moisture out, because the mold spores setting on top of the surface next to the air, if it has dampness in it, has moisture in it, those mold spores will send their tentacles down through the apple butter, and eventually the whole bowl would be spoiled. Since we had refrigeration, we no longer needed to have it preserved that way. We started putting it over and dipped it over into small jars. So we got everybody that ever came collecting jars. So we have gobs and gobs of jars like this that we fill. And then the idea will be, if people are here when we are filling the jars, they can take those home. Otherwise, we'll try to get it to them sometime the week after.